Welcome to the Eagle Podcast. This week's topic is a deeper perspective on homeschooling, and my guest is Esther, and I'm Edie. I'm a homeschool mom and a member of Eagle Mom Squad. We're here to help anyone who's new to homeschooling figure out everything about it as they go, and anyone who's considering homeschooling, and also experienced homeschoolers who want to know more or evaluate what they're doing. And Esther has a deeper perspective on homeschooling, I think, because, Esther, tell us your background a little bit and why that might be.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast again today. I enjoy being part of the Eagle Mom Squad and just giving that deeper perspective, because as a person who was homeschooled for most of my life, I just really love talking about my experiences and kind of showing people that, as a college graduate now and working, that you can be successful as a former homeschool student.
Yeah. First perspective, and I love the perspective that you're now teaching your own music students.
That's right. Private music lessons, flute and piano. And when you're teaching music, a lot of people think that you just show them the notes, but actually kind of, picking up from how I was taught by you, actually,
Right.
There's so much more that goes into music. You're teaching history, you're teaching self-confidence, you're teaching discipline, you're teaching how to overcome and solve problems, but also other focuses that go along with the music. So as you're teaching the kids, they discover there's so much more behind the meaning of a piece of music. You could get into the math of it, things like that.
Yeah, I love it. We did all that, huh? That's great. And I know you have other wonderful teachers. I'm really honored to be a part of your stable of teachers, and now I know your students are getting wonderful, high-quality lessons. And as you say, it does cover everything, including being an athlete at your instrument. So you have to keep healthy, keep relaxed, stay fit in order to get your instrument to do what, even
right.
if
And
it's your voice, or especially your
good
voice.
point there, because actually a lot of the kids that also do sports, it helps because then I can relate what they're doing with sports to music. It's the same, just on a very small level, because with sports you do a lot of big movements, and music is a lot of small movements, but still the repetition, getting your mind to connect to what your body is doing,
Right.
to really just get that practice in. And it's that same idea, that same, like I said, self-discipline.
Right, yeah. And that's our little plug for education in the arts. But you had, just in our conversation previous to starting our tape, we were talking about how the education picture for the country may be really different after this pandemic. Mm-hmm. And you had talked to a few of your students about this?
Right, and myself, with what's been happening, I had to transition very quickly from
Right.
teaching in the studio to teaching online, and I was able to have the access to technology to help me with that. My students, fortunately, were able to do that. I had to help a couple people get set up, but then once we did, we were good to go. And it's been an interesting challenge doing that. And of course, the students themselves have had to, with their regular schoolwork,
Right.
have had to cope with doing things online. And some of them really struggled at first, especially some of the children that might have learning difficulties.
Right.
And some of them really thrived with that online, because the social interaction with children is important, but sometimes school can be difficult for children and they don't do well with their peers, and they're much more comfortable learning at their own pace at home by themselves. So it's been interesting as kids are getting back to school. I've been talking to some of them and asked them, hey, how do you like being online? How do you like being back at school? And some of them really prefer to keep that online component because that works better for them. They learn better that way.
And they're partially online here in Pennsylvania anyway.
Right.
For a majority of schools, I think.
Mm-hmm. And anytime there's any sort of someone might be sick, then they're just play it safe. We'll keep everyone out of school for a week. And now they have the systems in place for that to happen instantly instead of everyone being off for 2 weeks while they scramble to figure it out. So, you do have to give a lot of credit to the teachers in the education system that have worked very hard to make education possible, because, in this country, we're so fortunate that people are able to be educated, be able to read, be able to write, and we want to encourage that in whatever form that takes.
Right, and as you say, as teachers we know we had to turn on a dime, go online, and get everybody equipped with what they needed at home, which must have been a massive undertaking. But anyway, so I think with possibly school choice and our ability to have maybe parents at home facilitating public or homeschooling or private schooling, and our technology, we may just be starting a golden age of education, is my hope, actually. You know, to make the best of every opportunity that we have, rather than trying to grind through what we've been given from the past to get everyone trained to be good scribes, be good factory workers, instead of taking their abilities and running with them with all of the advantages they can get a hold of, you know.
Right. And, you know, I was just thinking, one of my little music students who her mom decided to do homeschooling this year, and it's been a new experience for her. My little music student was telling me she plays the flute, and she's very cute and adorable. We actually have to have a curved flute for her because her fingers are too small to do the long head joint. But she had said she was excited about what they were learning, and they were learning about baseball, and then her mom got a book for her about a little girl who wanted to be a baseball player.
Oh, that's cool.
And then in part of that, they were listening to Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and then they had a piano piece for that. So I said, well, what I'll do, and since it's in the public domain, I was able to do this with no issues, is take the tune and arrange it for her for flute, and then she's been enjoying playing that. And so it works into her homeschool study. So I try to, as much as possible, you know, help the students enrich whatever it is that they're learning.
That's great, and I think that way of unit studying that's so organic to homeschoolers, and I think public schoolers teachers try to make use of that kind of thing too, but it's a little less immediate that they can turn all of those ideas into an actual thing for 30 people to be doing, because not everyone is interested in that. The subjects that go into that unit study,
it just can't be as individualized. They're trying to get everybody, and so sometimes it tends to be a little bit more quantity over quality.
Right. And so in your background, I know you did a lot of unit studies that way, so this made that pretty natural for you to
because I recognized exactly what the mom was doing. That's exactly what my mom did for us, you know, particularly, you know, we'd come here and we'd learn with you, and one of us would be having music lesson, the other would be watching a movie about Mozart, and then we would write about it afterwards. So we're doing history, we're doing English studies, and then, you know, if we go ahead and play the music, then that's another component of it. So we're just kind of wrapping everything into one thing, but with a particular focus. So you can say, okay, this is more focused on the music aspect, and then we go and do science, and like this is the more science aspect, but then we go do that outside. You know, now it's environmental science and it's hands-on. So just kind of wrapping everything up with different focuses, but that you're not just focused on one thing to the exclusion of others.
Right. And my own daughter that homeschooled K-12 and is now an education major, she brings up, don't feel like to follow a child's curiosity that would lead into the unit studies you're talking about, you would just go through a haphazard pattern of, we're looking at bugs, now we're looking at this, and now sort of like following flitting butterflies of subjects. You can have a progressive, orderly mastery of skills and knowledge through that curiosity stream. That sounds overwhelming, but there's so many resources that can help with that kind of...
Right. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was teaching yesterday and I was talking to one of my students, and, you know, it's not just teach. I like to get them to feel comfortable, so we talk about things that they're interested in as well.
Right.
Not too much, because we don't want to take up all the lesson time, but we were talking about something, and at the end of that, I pivoted it back around and say, and then this relates to the music this way. So I try to draw things together, so you can let the child talk about things they're interested in, and, you know, not that it's child-led, because, you know, as the parent, the teacher, if you're part of a co-op, you're setting the subject and you're setting the guidelines, but you can encourage a child's curiosity and still find a way to relate what they're interested in back to whatever subject that you've chosen to study.
Right. It's kind of cyclical. You take the interest and then you give perspective, and then the child is giving their perspective, and it sort of builds organically again.
That's right.
Yeah, great. And another thing I wanted to ask you about as far as perspective, you came from England, and you were 13?
No, actually, I 3 days after we came, I turned 8. I remember because I had a birthday party and I managed to pull it together. We knew a couple people that were here before we moved, so I kind of like, I guess my parents must have contacted them before we traveled and say, hey, you know, can we make this special? Because it was, you know, we just moved and it was like this strange new place.
That is so cool.
With some familiar faces.
That is mastery of socializing, I think, from your mom's point of view and yours.
Yeah. But, you know, when you bring up socializing, I think that was one of the biggest enrichments that we had coming here, because if you look at the history of homeschooling in Pennsylvania, it was illegal at one point, and parents campaigned very hard to fight for the right to educate your own children. And you know, laying that groundwork is so important because we look at what's happened with COVID-19. Imagine if it was still illegal, what are you going to do, right?
Right. I think it would become legal.
Oh, right.
After everyone
but laws take a long time to
change.
Right. So it was, you know, really great that they were able to lay that foundation. And so there's a very strong history, a very strong root of homeschooling in Pennsylvania particularly. And when we moved here, we were able to find vibrant communities of homeschooling. Not that we didn't do well with homeschooling in the UK, but I don't remember getting together with people in the same way. Like, there were 3 of us, so we would hang out and do stuff with our own little family. When I say 3 of us, I mean me and my brothers. And we would go to the park and dress up and do things that were related to our homeschooling. But it was different from when we came here. All of a sudden, we had all these other kids that we were able to then share that homeschooling journey with. And I think that was a very important aspect of coming here.
That's interesting. So I take it from what your mom has told me that in England it wasn't a big deal to be homeschooling because people had always schooled at home with governesses.
Right. And they did that here in America too, but at some point when we kind of got away from the one-room schoolhouse in America, the homeschooling was looked down upon as like, oh, that's a backwards country thing.
Right.
Whereas in England, the more wealthy and higher off you are, the more you can afford to, like, oh, look, I'm teaching my child privately. So it's a little bit of a classist thing, and England's a little bit classist. So yeah, but it's not really looked down upon in the same way in certain circles.
And yet, just your circumstances, you had fewer playmates at that time.
Right, because
I think you were new to it also.
Right, we were much younger, but still most of the people that were doing homeschooling were kind of spread out throughout England.
I see, okay.
Yeah. So even here where it's more rural, it's like, oh, there's people everywhere that's homeschooling. Maybe that's more why, because people who are in the city tend to just send their kids to school because they're busier, they have more going on. And here in the country, I think life moves at a little bit of a slower pace. And, you know, we've seen with COVID, a lot of the people have struggled to keep up with the technology. They don't have the internet. Maybe they don't have the resources because they're further away. And so it's easier for them, you know, go into whatever homeschool convention, whatever, get all their resources that they need for the year and then just be able to teach, you know, get all those books that they need. And then they don't have to worry about putting their kid on the bus for an hour just to get to school.
Right, right. And, you know, this brings up the socialization again. A lot of kids, even if they're back in public school, are finding a need for socialization because they're online. They're not meeting with their buddies in class or in recess or in study hall or on the bus. All of those connecting points. Do you have any perspective, and I get this question from grandmas that I know and other people, their kids need to get out and see people. And I know as a homeschool mom, you join the homeschool group, you see online what the event is, you go meet at a park. Now, today, people may be more disconnected, especially perhaps people in the younger years where they weren't making their own friends as teenagers or preteens. You know, they were in the class and they had all of those social arrangements made for them.
Right, it's kind of built in.
So, do you have any ways that you have noticed your students are able to get together with their public school friends?
It depends. I know I've asked my students, and they say it's really not like being in class when they see their other classmates on Zoom or whatever.
Sure.
Because they can see everybody, but that person isn't physically in the room with them. So
Plus, I'm sure they can't chat.
Right, they definitely can. I did ask about that. They're like, yeah, no one can talk to each other in that way. Because they all have to listen to the teacher, and if they don't, it's very easy for the teacher to see who's not paying attention. So some of them are really struggling, especially this places where school is just all online right now.
Right.
They're really struggling with not being able to see their peers if that's something they were really used to. I know some of the students, though, that are back at school have been able to go back to their extracurricular activities. I know there are some sports have been going on, theater, things like that, and they've told me that that has been really, really helpful for them. And so I think that's something that people who are just online can consider. Is there something that's an extracurricular that I can get my child into?
Right.
That can be done in a safe way, of course, that maybe it's through the school, maybe it's through a different school, that I can get my child to do that's going to give them some social interaction. Because it's, if your child likes being at home by themselves, that's okay, but they still need that human contact. There have been studies done that say people need other people.
Right.
So, if you take it back to the biblical perspective, God saw that it was not good for man to be alone, so he gave him a wife.
Right.
And so people need other people. It's important. And yeah, some of the students that they've told me they've really struggled with not seeing their classmates in person. And, with homeschooling, I think a lot of people have tried to find ways to get together with co-ops, even if it's just a few people.
Right.
So it's just not them and their family.
Well, I know if you are connected with a homeschool group and they have events, for instance, a park day, that's kind of like recess, except that you have a one-on-one or a two-on-one ratio of parent to child. So unlike a whole 80 kids on a playground with 2 teachers watching them, the mother could come over, or the dad, and say, hey, could you just be a little farther away from your playmate here in the sandbox?
Right.
Or, hey, your mask is off. I get the feeling that it would be easier to monitor safety for the pandemic.
Well, from what I remember when we were kids, conflict resolution is easier because the 2 parents can talk to each other and say, okay, so-and-so told me that your child did this to them.
Right.
And instead of, which, you see a lot in the public school, the parents are now on the teacher, like, hey, this is what I heard from the school. It's like, okay, let's each of us parents talk to each other because, we mutually agreed to be here. Right. And then let's talk to the children and let's see if we can work it out. And so I think when that framework's already established, something like COVID, it's easier to say, yeah, let's fall back on that framework and be like, okay, as parents, we can work together to help our children learn to work together.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. And that brings me to another deeper perspective you may have. So now you're an adult working, you've gone to college, and you have the perspective of how your parents were with you in homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And there's such a thing as a helicopter parent.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of the folks that I talk to who aren't homeschoolers are saying, oh, your kids must have had such a hard time in college because they're not right under your gaze, being watched and monitored and guided. And I wonder whether you feel any of that, whether you felt too under the gaze of your parents, or whether you thought that was a good thing, or whether that's just a myth, that not all homeschoolers are like that.
Well, I think a lot of helicopter parents tend to be parents whose kids are in public school.
Interesting, okay.
Because they don't see their kids most of the time.
Sure.
And so when they do see them, they spend all their time with them. And if you're a parent who spends all your time with your 3 kids who are absolutely crazy and driving you insane, you want space from your children.
Sure.
And so you're like, go out in the backyard and play and do not come back inside. You're either inside or you're outside. And if you go outside, you stay there. And so, so I think you try to teach your children to have independence.
That makes sense. And there's more time to work out relationships, I think, and difficulties in the family. And that makes us strong when we're relating to other people. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while, I feel like did I get too engaged in every aspect of my child's life, and now they're at college and having to deal with that themselves? I think they feel a little bit of a, oh gosh, now I have to be independent, and this is more than I thought it would be.
I think everybody feels that in college, though.
Yeah, it could just be.
Because your teachers give you so much work to do.
Right.
I had a couple teachers that people would be crying after their lessons in college because I just gave them so much work that it was almost unmanageable. And
yes,
so I think
music majors are really, really burdened with a lot.
The teachers always had, if you have free time, you have practice time. It's just like,
right.
But we also have other classes, which makes me laugh when my students tell me, I couldn't really practice this week. I wasn't going to tell them, try being a music major in college.
Right. You could always practice more. And I'm sure it's like that with sports, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
You could always be,
Always.
working to get better physically and team-wise. I will report that my freshman in college homeschooler daughter says the workload is about like high school. It's not challenging, but just being with everyone who's the same age as I am, and so many of them, is a little change for her, and she's trying to work that out.
Got it. Yeah, I know for me, I didn't go into a 4-year college straight away. I did the 2-year college and then 4-year college. So when I was at the community college, it was really interesting. It was more like a co-op experience for me because at co-op, you could have one class that would range from like 13 to 19. It was just whoever hadn't completed that subject and what their level of schooling ability was at. Mm-hmm. So it's like, there could be many of us in a different grade level in one class just based on who needed to fulfill that requirement. And at community college, it was very similar.
Right.
So there were people that were like my age, just fresh out of high school in college. But there were people who were retired, who were coming back to school. There were overseas students. It was all sorts of different people from different walks of life and different backgrounds. And so then when I transferred into the 4-year college and I was closer to other people my age, it was coming from an experience of having been surrounded by a lot of other people first. So for me, the experience was a little bit different, which I think it's actually a good idea to experience community college a little bit, even if you don't do that for your college years. And by that, what I mean is at the end of high school, you can earn college credits by going and taking a couple classes at the community college. And I think that's a great way as a homeschool person to prepare for the college experience. Take a couple classes, get some credits in that will help you with your regular college classes when you're in college. And maybe you even get enough credits to earn an associate's degree, you don't know. But that way you're not, you're dipping your toe in the water. You're kind of getting an experience of like, oh, okay, this is what it's like to be around all these other people.
Right. It's great. And I love that diversity of kinds of people who are attending community college. More like homeschooling, I guess, because you're relating socially to all ages and circumstances. I will say that you could also go to a regular college campus for dual enrollment in your high school years.
Mm-hmm. You can do that too, yeah.
Sure. If you, just a little technicality, we found you can audit a course in a college, particularly if you have a private college near you. It can be very pricey, especially if you're trying to do one income in the family for homeschooling. So that can be very pricey. You can work around that by auditing the course instead. Mm-hmm. Then you don't have to pay as much tuition or any, perhaps, depending on the school. But you don't have access to everything in the class. For instance, an audited English class at a private school we attempted, the writing wouldn't be critiqued by the teacher because rightfully they had to put all of their time into the paying students who were going there privately to have enough time to critique their writing. So, and also the collaborative work wasn't available. But other courses might be fine, and then you would still get high school credit.
Right. Well, that's why I was saying the community college aspect is good because it's much, much cheaper.
Right.
And you can pay per course, just do that, and you'll get credits that are good for your eventual college career if you want to do that.
Right.
Because not everybody wants to go to college afterward, but it's kind of good to get an experience. Do you like this or not? But speaking of the auditing aspect, that's really important to bring up because we audited a lot of college classes when we were kids because we had Gettysburg College,
right?
Harrisburg Area Community College, HAC, And I think my little brother did some stuff at Carroll Community. We went to a lot of, Dickinson.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of places that we could go, but we did most of the stuff at Gettysburg. And my mom would get the textbooks and read through them and do all the independent research, so that when we were auditing the college classes, and we would only go like 1 out of the 2 or 3 days that the class was being held, we would talk to the professors, get their approval, go, and then she would fill in the gaps that the professors were not filling in because they had to give that time to their students.
Sure.
So she would give us assignments and have us, on a high school level, and have us fulfill them, and then she would critique them and give us the grade. So she was using the college classes to enrich her knowledge, but also our knowledge, but then she stepped in and filled in those gaps. So as a homeschool parent, that's something that could also be interesting. You don't just send your child out there on your own, but you as a parent go with them, and get that experience, understand what they've been teaching. Again, sometimes colleges can be very much on the liberal side, and if that's something that you're not into, then you as a parent can then say, let's look at this with discernment.
Right.
How can we take what they're saying and dissect it and understand what they're saying in the light of what we believe?
Right. And so there's that school choice idea, where you can, as a family, make decisions about what you're going to explore and how you're going to explore it. And from my point of view, getting all of the perspectives and learning how to think critically and make your own decisions, it will be very valuable because you'll be less gullible. You'll see what the landscape is as far as what is reputable information and what isn't. And you'll be, able to make your own decisions. And I just wanted to add to our college campus choices, which is pretty rich around here, but I'm thinking about we have listeners all over the country, which is so wonderful. Someone in Wyoming, maybe. There are lots of virtual campuses now, which is another technological boon for us. I wanted to ask you about teaching and learning history and civics as a new citizen of the country. You got your citizenship when you were 20? Do you remember?
No, I would have been, because I graduated college at 21. I think I was 22 or 23.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's been a while.
So I have a big question about that, but before I do, you had said that the test for being a new citizen was kind of easy for you from your experience.
Yeah, so, they have this booklet full of tests. You can get the test questions anytime, and they will ask you a certain amount of questions off the test, and you have to, I think, at least get a 60% to pass. And before I went and studied for it, I just went through and tested myself to see if I could understand and get the questions, and I think I did about a 60% without even studying for it.
And all American citizens should take this practice test.
Right, to see what you know about your
and
country. The only thing that was a little bit, I really had to think about at the time, one of the justices on the Supreme Court had just passed away, so the test was out of date because it was saying how many justices are there, and at that point there was less than the normal amount. But apart from that, and that's the thing about civics, it's constantly changing. The political landscape is very charged, and I know it can be exhausting to keep up with, but it's worth educating yourself to just at least understand on a surface level what people are talking about. That goes back to that critical thinking. But anyway, from learning civics and really studying American history, because as in Pennsylvania, they're pretty strict on making sure that you study your state history and your federal history, to understand how this country came together is something that I've always been interested in. And I learned that through studying it in school. But I think history can be a subject that people don't understand why they have to study it.
Right.
And if you contextualize it, it's better. So I used to watch Liberty's Kids all the time. It was a show on PBS. And learned a lot about the American Revolution from that. I used to really be into the series American Dolls, and they have little books that go along with them that take place at different key points in history. So like Addie is to do with, emancipation, Kaya has to do with Native American people, Kit has to do with the Great Depression, and so these different eras in history, I would love to read these, like the diary series that you'd find in the library about these girls from different eras of history. And so when you put it in more of like the historical fiction, I think that really helps to solidify it. And then we would do the reenactments at Gettysburg and bring history to life by acting it out.
You're in their footsteps.
Right. So by doing that and by taking the history and making it personal and real, I think that helped it stay with me more. And so when I was taking these questions, it wasn't just abstract. It was like, oh, okay, so this is important because it relates to this time in history, which I'm, really interested about.
Right. I love that. It brings up to my mind two tangents that I'll quickly ask you about. The first is, when you present anything, if you give a reason for an emotional connection to that information, that's going to make it stick better with the people who are listening to you, whether it be a child or a student.
That's right.
Or your general audience. And presenting music to your ensemble, for instance, why would they want to play it?
Right.
And if you say, this is amazing how this came into being, and or whatever background you want to put on it, then people are engaged in trying to recreate that idea that the composer first had. The other thing that brings to mind is the importance of the arts in presenting information. Did you ever see the documentary Paperclip?
I'm not sure what's it about.
It is the most amazing documentary to me from the viewpoint of an arts teacher. It had a simple idea, but through this documentary process that it's presented in, it just comes to a huge resonant importance in the viewer's consciousness. And without the arts being part of it, you wouldn't get the same impact from the information. So very quickly, the information is a project that came about in a rural school in Tennessee to understand the weight of the Holocaust by collecting the number of paper clips that Hitler killed during the Holocaust. Because the kids were like, well, how many people is it? I don't even have a connection with
Got it.
6
so
million. What is
it?
Right. And that the documentary documents the process from a simple project of the teacher to understand racism or Holocaust horrors for a middle school child into getting the whole country involved. The reporters from the Washington Post covered it. It got national notoriety on 60 Minutes. And pretty soon they were getting paper clips from celebrities. And it just grew and grew and grew. And they created this monument to survivors in Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
With a cattle car used during the Holocaust to transport Jews to Poland. They actually found a cattle car, the reporters from the Washington Post had it transported to the Tennessee school. And while it was being transported from overseas into Baltimore Port and then on by rail down to the school, 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
And the way the documentary evolves through that process is a little uneven as far as an arts project because it changed. It's from a simple, oh, this is a project, this is how school handled it, to whoa, of national and worldwide import to not have this hatred producing a violent effect and killing people.
Right.
That suddenly was resonating from this little rural southern town. But without having seen that documentary, I wouldn't know anything about it. I mean, if I hadn't seen the articles or whatever. Again, articles written about it, that's an arts vehicle.
Right.
And so training in the arts also gives us an important way to see the world that touches us emotionally.
Right.
And you as a composer, do you ever think about that kind of, not deep responsibility, but the joy that you get to participate in that?
Yeah, usually for me, I mean, some people like to just write music for like, oh, look, I've connected this. It's like some people do poetry where it's like, this is a specific art and how it goes together and I'm going to do it the most perfect way, which is, I think you get a lot of that in Mozart, which for me makes Mozart a little joyless to listen to. I love playing it because it's very showy, but not super into listening to it for the same reason. But if you then go just a little bit further to Beethoven, he had his music that was based on something. Like
Mm-hmm.
Ode to Joy touched a lot of people because it meant something.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I'm not saying that Mozart's works didn't mean something. I love his operas. I think they're very good. But for me, when I'm composing, I like to have a story or an emotion that I'm trying to express.
Right.
Because, you know, a lot of times when I'm teaching my kids, we get up to major and minor. It's like, how do we describe it? We talk about it in terms of emotions. We say it's happy or sad just to start. And then we say, okay, how can we dissect that further? So something more in the major realm can be tranquil. It can be joyful. It can be triumphant. It can be peaceful. And then something in the minor realm can be, yes, sad, but also melancholy, angry. You know, we can have different emotions. And when those emotions connect with the student, then connect in a performance, then connect with the audience, you're right, it's a great way to remember it. And one of the things I really love is music and film.
Yes.
And one of the films I studied in school was Braveheart,
Okay.
which is a good film. The director, who was also the principal star, he gets a little bit in the way of his own film. But if you kind of remove that just a little bit, if you watch the movie without the music, it's a different experience. And I did that because I
Sure.
wanted to understand how influential the music was.
And you write film music, don't you?
I'm working toward that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Right.
something that I would definitely like to be able to do, because without that music, you don't even realize how much it's influencing your mood
Right.
in that scene. And so you feel a certain way toward the characters on the screen because of what the music is subtly influencing you to do. And I'm sure when you watch that documentary, it had music in it too.
Sure, it did.
And so it kind of pushes your emotions toward feeling a certain thing. And, you know, whether it's, I've been watching America's Got Talent recently, and they've had, for the first time ever, a spoken word poet.
Okay.
And I enjoy spoken word poetry. And every time this man has come on, he's just moved me in a way that's so amazing. He starts and you're kind of like, okay, I'm not sure where this is going. And then you just get captured by his words and the way that he uses the beauty of the English language to express his ideas. And it just is very powerful. And you remember it because maybe you don't remember these specific words, but you remember how you felt when
Right.
you experienced that. And having that emotion, you know, taking back to history, is when you contextualize history, when you contextualize art, when you contextualize science, and you can put how you feel behind it, it can be a very useful vehicle in helping us to internalize that and
Right.
use it to enrich our lives going forward.
And others. People.
Mm-hmm.
We will put in the descriptions of this podcast links that you can link to that, what did you call it?
Spoken word poetry.
Spoken word poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And also Paperclips documentary and anything else that you think we should include, so you can track these things down. The moment in that Paperclips documentary where you find out that this is happening during 9/11 has amazing music with it. I will play you that part sometime and you can see, speaking of that kind of thing. Anyway, my last question today: what made you want to become a U.S. citizen?
I've always just loved the United States, but I think specifically when we were kids, Mom said she was going to, we were studying ancient civilizations. We'd study China, and she's like, okay, now we're going to study the Indians. But we didn't know she meant India.
Right.
We thought she meant the Native American people of America. And this goes back to the idea of the child-led studies. My mom saw that we were so enthused by the idea of studying the Native American people
Right.
that she was like, okay, let's do this instead. So we
See.
got into doing that, and I think that just really gave me a love for the country and, you know, the people who lived here first and still live here. I think a lot of times people refer to Native Americans as if they've disappeared. They
Sure.
haven't.
Right.
I know
It's
a
not
lot
so.
of people personally who are either Native or part Native,
Uh-huh.
and they just take so much joy in, you know, their heritage,
Uh-huh.
and just the love and the beauty of this country is what I think drew me to it. The history of America is very storied,
Yes, that's true.
and there's been a lot of things that are very ugly to look at.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to study all these things, because if you know what they say about those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
But there's also so much beauty. And if you look at how far the country has come in just a few hundred years,
Right.
and the progresses we've made in technology and both social movements as well, you can see that there's a lot of people who worked very hard to make this country beautiful, not just physically, but also as a place to ideologically live. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me toward it, because you can see there's just a spirit of wanting to be better,
Right.
and wanting to do good for yourself, do good for your children, do good for people around you.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's something that definitely has to continue being impressed on the educational system.
Right.
It was President Kennedy who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best ways to do that is to become an educated, informed citizen.
Right.
Because by uplifting each other, then you can uplift the world.
Yes. And that's what we're trying to do with Eagle Momcast, is to help parents who find themselves perhaps new to homeschooling and panicked. And we've helped some people get their feet under them, and that we're so grateful for. Out of that spirit of trying to help each other, pull everyone up to a golden age of education. This is my viewpoint. And Esther, I'm so thrilled that we got together today. This has been wonderful, as usual, to talk with you. And if you like what you heard and want to hear more, just check out our descriptions below. And we have links to our website, our videos, more podcasts, and resources that you might find helpful as a homeschooler or a parent new to it, or even a parent who's public schooling and needs a little enrichment. All right, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
See you next time.